Urban Agorist Podcast, episode number 10. My name is James, and today I am excited to be joined by one of the giants of libertarianism, one of my favorite communicators, Jeffrey Tucker of the American Institute for Economics Research. First, I'd like to tell you about wax and wick candles. A wax and wick candle is the perfect gift for the guy in your life who doesn't want his apartment smelling like vanilla pumpkin pie frappuccino. The all-natural candles from Wax and Wick come in classy scents like whiskey, oak moss, and black amber. If the guy in your life has enough pairs of socks, head over to www.urbanagorist.com/candles for a unique Christmas gift he'll cherish. And with that, let's get into it with Jeffrey Tucker. All right, Jeffrey Tucker, welcome to the Urban Agorist Podcast. Thanks so much for joining me today.
That's my pleasure, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So being that you're one of the bigger names in libertarianism, I'm guessing that a lot of my listeners are familiar with you, but why don't you kind of fill us in on where you've been, where you're at right now, where you're going?
Sure.
That kind of thing.
So I'm at the American Institute for Economic Research, and I'm the editorial director here, and it's been a wild year. I have last year, I guess my book was The Market Loves You, and that was a nice book. But then a lot of things changed, and so this year I have a new book out called Liberty or Lockdown. So, the world's dramatically in upheaval this year. I've spent most of my career writing, happy things, helping people understand that the market economy is really about human beings and built by human beings, human choice, and that it's got a service ethic at the very heart of it, and it's a way we can connect with each other and make the world a better place and make life more wonderful and pretty. And I've been writing along those lines for most of ever since I began this, since the mid '80s really, and so I've generally been a very happy person. I was reluctant this year to do what I had to do in terms of lockdowns, because it's not in my nature to complain, and much less be sad and observe so much sadness around me. Mm-hmm. But I did it because I just noticed that there was not enough fight in people going into this pandemic. I warned about this January 27th. I said, the government does have these quarantine powers. I doubt they'll ever be used, but they are out there, and would be highly regrettable to see them deployed. It doesn't matter how bad or how mild or how severe the pathogen is. Public health is never a good excuse for violating people's human rights. Mm-hmm. And then it all happened, right? And it all happened very quickly. And I think it was March 8th was the day in which the government of Austin shut down South by Southwest. Now, in retrospect, that was a catastrophic decision because there wasn't anybody who was attending South by Southwest, 250,000 people, who was in any special sense vulnerable to COVID-19. And plus, it's my own view that people should be able to make their own decisions and not have governments make those decisions for them. So I wrote an article saying, why are we choosing this draconian methods for disease mitigation? And then it got worse, and then it got worse, and then it got worse, and that's basically the history of this year, unfortunately.
I was actually just in Austin last month, and it's even weirder than I live in Minneapolis, which is also kind of a weird progressive city, but Austin takes it to a new level. They had retail stores with the front door shut and locked. You couldn't enter until a clerk came and let you in to let the previous person out. We went to a restaurant, and there was someone apparently on staff who was just paid to stop people from refilling their drinks at the soda fountain. Nearly everyone was wearing a mask outdoors on the sidewalk. It wasn't crowded. There were just, people walking around by themselves, or in small groups, with their little muzzles on. It was really kind of sad. And then, of course, the very famous Austin mural, where everyone takes their pictures. It says, "I love you so much." And of course, because it was election season, they painted over the "I love you so much" and changed it to "I love voting so much." So I didn't even get my cool mural picture from this trip to Austin.
Talk about hyper politicization. It's been the strangest thing because in that little anecdote she just told you, you see several things. I mean, one is a kind of a mysticism or a superstition that's grown up around this virus. So you can't see it, and so people are not happy with the idea that we don't know where the virus is. So they just start making things up. Oh, there are viruses here, the virus is there. I better wear this, wear that, do this kabuki dance, and stand away from people and treat everybody as a potential pathogen instead of a human being with dignity. So there's that. And then the politicization of a virus. There's like the worst thing you could ever do is turn over disease mitigation to government, because that necessarily means you're going to politicize the whole thing.
Yeah.
And so this year, so it's been one of the strangest things that you can actually track people's attitudes towards mitigation efforts and public health based on their political outlook rather than science. So we've just thrown science out in favor of politics, and it's been catastrophic. I hope we learned the right lessons from this year, but it's going to take, I would say, years and years and years, maybe even decades before people have confidence again in the stability of the things we used to take for granted. The freedom to travel, that we can start a business. The government won't just shut it down.
Right.
That we can have a job and hold that job based on whether we like it or not, quit when we want to, take another job. Now we have government telling us, who's essential and who's not essential. Mm-hmm. Even access to healthcare has been massively disrupted. Governments all over the country, astonishingly, decided to get rid of elective surgeries and screenings for a good part of the year, based on the belief that COVID was going to be much, much worse than it turned out to be. And so 350 hospitals in this country furloughed workers because they didn't have any patients. Mm-hmm. And, and I mean, during 3 months of this year, in major parts of the country, you could not go to the dentist. I mean, like, we got rid of dentistry. Just the litany of things that has been done this year in the name of disease management is utterly shocking. And I think it's going to take a long time for us to come to terms with what's happened, and I don't think that people will get their confidence back until we get open admission on the part of public health officials and politicians that what they did was wrong. And to my knowledge, nobody has said that yet.
Yeah, other than perhaps Governor DeSantis in Florida.
I was going to say that, yeah.
Yeah, he reopened, and actually he gave a pretty good message, I think. And actually in collaboration with the same scientists who wrote the Great Barrington Declaration, if I recall. Which was
they Kulldorff, Bhattacharya, and Gupta all went to a sort of a Zoom meeting with DeSantis and instructed him on the science, and because he's very, very sophisticated about this. The other one is Kristi Noem from South Dakota. She knows her stuff too. But Governor Kemp from Georgia is had not been all that terrible. But those are pretty rare figures in the United States. You'd think that this country, after all the sloganeering we've done for so many generations, really since the Gilded Age, about land of the free, home of the brave, our Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and all these things, that we wouldn't have taken this course of action. But even now, I mean, it's just amazing how this stuff just lasts and lasts. The Wall Street Journal this morning runs an article by Scott Gottlieb at the American Enterprise Institute, which was once in favor of free markets and capitalism. It's probably his 20th article on the Wall Street Journal op-ed page. And he's calling for all bars and restaurants in the whole country to be shut down again. I mean, it's just like, how do you do that? And on what basis? I've got an intern right now, actually not an intern, employee, looking at the science behind the bar and restaurant bans, and it's all just flimsy nonsense, all silly modeling with all sorts of fallacies and mistakes and statistical errors. And there's something like 5 studies out there that seem to kind of indicate that restaurants spread COVID, but none of them really make a verifiable thesis, and all of them are bad science. There's no evidence whatsoever that the restaurants are spreading COVID death. I mean, it's just ridiculous. There seems to be a kind of, I've written a lot about the social and political aspects of it. There seems to be like this puritanism. They when they went after, when they decided they would mitigate the disease, they went out after everything that was fun. Anything that was fun, you had to go. So bowling and surfing and parties and gatherings and Broadway and Disney World, and conventions and hotels and freedom of travel, all had to go. And then we all had to kind of don sort of middle-aged style costumes, with masks and dreary clothing, and stay away from each other, and now with with the universal masking of everybody, you can't even smile at each other anymore. So the whole thing is so completely shocking. And one of the things I think maybe you've thought about, I'm not sure, but I've thought about it too, is I don't understand. A lot of people around the world are looking to the U.S. to resist this stuff, and we've seen, I would say, less resistance to lockdowns in this country than you see in places like Italy and France, and even Denmark had huge street protests last week, that actually caused the government to back down from some of its mandates. But in this country, we've seen very little in that way, and actually, I think you speak about how you identify as a libertarian, as do I, and I would have thought that we could have made a little more noise than we did this year. Quite often I felt like, AIR was standing up, not entirely alone, but just with a handful of others, really. Right. And so many other libertarians just went quiet. I think partially out of just confusion. They didn't know anything like this was possible, and they didn't know enough about public health to really address the problem intelligently. So they just decided to go quiet. But I think it's been catastrophic. And notice the public opinion polls are shifting, though. That's good.
Yeah, that is good. And unfortunately, I mean, from the beginning, the major noisemakers on our side were also waving Trump flags and, saying petty things like, I want a haircut, which really isn't petty. I mean, I wanted a haircut too, but also people are dying of things other than COVID. And a lot of people are dying of COVID lockdowns.
Yeah, that's right. And you're right. The politics of it has been absolutely poisonous, that the idea that if you're favoring openness, that must make you a Trump supporter. And that's very confusing because, we shouldn't forget that all of this began with Trump. The lockdowns began with Trump. He was, March 12th, right? He banned flights from Europe, the UK, and Australia. I didn't know the president had that power. And in normal times, we would call any president who did something like that a despot. That was Trump. Then on March 13th, the White House released a kind of a Soviet-style central plan for shutting down schools and shopping centers and that sort of thing. As far as I know, the only copy of that document, which was previously classified, is at our American Institute for Economic Research's website. We posted it, and then on March 16th, the CDC was recommending shutting down all schools. So this is the Trump administration, and Trump didn't come around to the purely open, to the view that we, with confidence, should just open everything back up and be back to normal until something like maybe July or August, and mostly under the influence of Scott Atlas, who once he got to the White House, began to talk some sense into the president. I'm really grateful for that.
Did you see the backlash that Scott Atlas is getting here recently? He tweeted something about protesting the Michigan relocking down. And of course, he used the words rise up. And so now his detractors are saying that he's calling for violence against the governor of Michigan.
Well, it's just so insincere. I mean, I knew exactly what Scott was saying when he said that. He meant people shouldn't stand for these attacks on the rights and liberties. He wasn't calling for violence. This is a deliberate misreading of his tweet. But this is this year, right? Everything you say is somehow twisted. I mean, I've been subjected to unbelievable amounts of abuse. The first wishes for my death, I started getting sometime in March, but now they're so common that I don't even pay attention to them anymore. It's like several times a day.
Yeah. I can't imagine being a public figure speaking. I mean, what amounts to heresy. You mentioned earlier that there's almost a mystical quality to this, and I think you're right. Even to the point of deification of a virus, it's so weird. You hear about good God-fearing Christians, but now it's really good virus-fearing COVIDians. I mean, when Donald Trump had the gall to say, "Do not be afraid of the virus," I mean, the Washington Post's headline was something like, Donald Trump, in opposition to all the science, says not to fear the virus, as if science has anything to say about, what our emotions should be.
Well, Trump violated a taboo with that comment, because he spoke a basic truth about immunology and viruses, and there's several things about viruses that we thought we knew. One is that they don't target everyone equally. There is a gradient, a demographic gradient associated with every virus, and every one of them is slightly different. This one is merciful towards healthy people, and its rage is focused mainly on people without functioning immune systems, which is highly regrettable. But the average age of death is 79 in this country. Probably 40% of the deaths occurred in long-term care facilities, and young people are almost no risk at all. I'm my own risk of death from COVID is 0.2%, probably less than that, actually. In fact, I don't know. I mean, I spoke to a high-end epidemiological statistician yesterday about some of these online risk assessment things, and he said they're just complete nonsense.
Yeah, of course, they're trying to scare you.
Yeah. Oh, well, the second thing that Trump, is that when you get the disease, you get antibodies to the disease, and those antibodies are built into your T cell memory, and that there are shared immunities from other coronaviruses. This is like cell biology basics, but for some reason this year, we've just this information has not been getting out, and mostly due to the media, I would say. That's
Boris Johnson, who's already had COVID. He had it months ago. Recently came down with it, and the headlines were all Boris Johnson is in self-isolation according to the rules, which that seems to be the big thing. Follow the science seems to be turning into follow the rules. So even if you do have immunity, or okay, maybe there have been 2 cases that might have been a reinfection or something like that, but even those, they're saying they're not infectious. They're not going to spread it to anybody. And I don't know the full story behind that. Maybe it's a complete dishonesty.
I asked an epidemiologist about that the other day, and I can't remember the number of how many people have had verified, at least positive PCR tests in the world. It's like 17 million, something ridiculous. So you have between 2 and 5 cases of where they believe are verified reinfections, but there's a number of considerations here. There could have been a mutation. In this case, the extreme rare exception proves the rule, and there's nothing that's not textbook about this virus. That's about it, but it's like we threw out all of our textbooks. One of the things I did early on in the pandemic was, because I've been writing about pandemics and liberty for 15 years, right? I mean, so I was like mentally prepared to deal with this, and what is the relationship between infectious disease and human liberty? It's a question that I've been sort of puzzling about for 15 years, but this year we've all been forced to upgrade our knowledge. So one of the very first things I did was I downloaded Cell Biology for Dummies, and I read the whole book. And it was easy. on Amazon. You can get it. And suddenly I find myself like more of an expert than most science reporters in this country. Yeah. So it's all just been this parade of ignorance. And you mentioned the Boris Johnson situation. He went into quarantine because he came into contact with somebody who has COVID, but he's immune. I mean, what are we talking about here? It's just a level of, yeah, it really is. And I'm not sure why this happened to us or who's behind it or what's going on. I try to resist conspiracy theories, but it's mystifying. I mean, I'll tell you, just the other day, a person who's very much at the heart of the federal government response to this thing, who's in meetings every day about this, who's been there from the beginning and following this thing, is completely opposed to lockdowns, so it's completely rational, asked me, he said, Jeffrey, why do you suppose this happened to us? And I'm thinking, if you're asking me, there's a real problem. I'm supposed to ask you, it's just crazy.
Yeah. And it almost, not to get too conspiratorial, but there obviously some very powerful people are taking advantage or plotting to take advantage of this situation that we're in. The World Economic Forum with their Agenda 2030 and Agenda 21, Build Back Better, the slogan that, everyone thought Joe Biden made up, but as it turns out, like every politician across the world has been using it. Do you have any thoughts on that? The Great Reset?
Well, there's no question there's some powerful people opposed to liberal society that want to use this for their own purposes, and that's really the case. But they've always been around. I don't understand why this year they happen to seem to have gained the levers of power. Now, one of the thinkers I really follow carefully on all this stuff is Sunetra Gupta. She's an epidemiologist at Oxford University, and I think she, more than anybody else, has given us a good way of understanding a way out of this problem, to not treat diseases and viruses and pathogens as exogenous to the social order, but rather something that surrounds us and always has surrounded us, and that we co-evolved with them. And even in their presence, she says that we have agreed to have rights and liberties and democracy and equality, even in the presence of these diseases, because if we panic and start dividing society by essential, unessential, saying what you can do, where you can shop, where you can travel, this kind of thing, what happens is that you end up forcing the burden of herd immunity upon the marginalized people, the poor, the voiceless, the working classes. And we create a new kind of caste system. It's not unusual at all in history that societies have assigned the burden of disease to certain people based on their religion and their race, their socioeconomic status, and so on. I mean, it's very interesting when you look at, like, India still has a caste system. It's part of the idea of being unclean is that you're diseased, right? So we make them bear the burden of the disease while the rest of us, stay home and stay safe, right? And so you create a kind of a new feudalism, and this is very common in pre-modern societies. You can even read in the Bible, there's always the leper colonies and the people that we assigned to have the job of bearing the disease for us so we could stay clean and get the leper bells and that sort of thing. It's one of the scandals of Jesus is that he went around taking away their status of being unclean people. As a rabbi, he had the power to do that. But even in the United States, under slavery, the slaves experienced all the diseases with far more prevalence than anybody else in the southern slaveocracies, right? So the Manor Estates, they tried to keep the disease out, and they just assigned slaves to bear all the burden of pathogens. So the key to modernity and to liberalism, this is a very important point, is that we agreed to share equally regardless of race or language or religion or socioeconomic status, the burden of herd immunity we share among all of us, and then we use intelligence to figure out who the vulnerable populations are, and we protect them until the pathogen becomes endemic. And that is how free societies evolved to deal with infectious diseases. It's a really modern idea, but it's something that in other words, we developed rights and liberties despite the presence of pathogens. We decided not to recreate a caste system like existed in the ancient world. We don't stay home, stay safe. We get out, and it is immoral to expect a certain class of people to bear all the burden of pathogens while we protect ourselves. And it's not only immoral, it's also really bad public health, because what you end up doing is isolating one group of privileged elites who develop naive immune systems, and then. Did
you say naive immune systems?
Yeah.
Can you define that? I think I can use context clues, but I've never heard the term.
Yeah, it just means that your immune system hasn't been upgraded to accommodate the latest pathogen.
Right.
And so where you see naive immune systems is usually in isolated tribes. This is infectious disease historians will talk about, like the strange way in which you'll have an isolated tribe in the Amazon or somewhere else, typical before modern travel. And they wouldn't be affected by any diseases because they never came to them.
Right.
And so the immune systems, so the world is filled with all these pathogens to which they had never been exposed. And so what happens is that the most minor pathogen that gets through wipes out everybody.
Right.
And suddenly you have a very mild disease like COVID-19 is, and it just kills everybody on sight because their immune systems are naive. And so that's what we've decided to do. I mean, this is New Zealand's plan, this is Australia's plan. This idea of suppressing the virus and keeping it away from us is actually making us sick. We can't live like this. We need. Very early on, there was an infectious disease expert writing for the New York Times. I'm trying to remember his name now. I want to say it's Franks or Katz, David Katz, said on the Bill Maher show, and this would have been something like second week of March. He said, it sounds a little, maybe it sounds shocking, but what we really need to do is get COVID because the fatality risk for 99.7% of the population is extremely low, much lower than for the seasonal flu. So get immune. And we'll get past this. We'll get herd immunity. We'll be done with it. And that's what we've always done. That's what we did with H1N1 in 2009. That's what we did with the Hong Kong flu of 68, 69, the Asian flu of 57, 58. And it's even what we, that's the way we've dealt with disease ever since 1918. 1918 is the last time we played this run and hide game with viruses, and we learned that it didn't work. I mean, the quarantines didn't work in 1918. The masking didn't work. And it wasn't even tried in most places in the country. It was like Chicago, San Francisco, a handful of other places tried these things. It didn't work. So what we've learned since then is to have a modern attitude towards these things. And so another point that Sunetra Gupta makes, which I don't know. I mean, I find this point absolutely mind-blowing. It never even occurred to me. But she's like this theoretical epidemiologist who really understands a lot of things. But she pointed out something amazing to me, which is that after World War I, when travel and migration became a very common way that we interact with people, and so trade blossomed all over the world. We were able to travel lots of different places. We had immigrants coming here and moving throughout the whole country, not just living in New York, but spreading out through the whole country. We had human beings more in contact with each other than ever before. And she said this is responsible. And I don't think she's a libertarian, much less a proponent of capitalism. But what she's basically saying is that capitalism, the rise of modern capitalism in the early part of the 20th century, led to the creation of the most robust and universally robust immune systems that humanity has ever seen. Mm-hmm. We ended our isolation and got better because our immune systems are adaptable. And we evolved to fight diseases, and we got ever better at it. And she says this is a major contributing factor for why lifespans have increased so much in the 20th century, and why new pathogens have been ever less deadly throughout the last 100 years. Right? So very interesting, because, as libertarians and enthusiasts for economics, we might tend to maybe attribute long lives and healthy lives and prosperity only to economic forces. Well, better
or with modern medicine or whatever,
modern medicine, or just riches, and we're smarter, like that. She says that a major factor is actually the strengthening of immune systems in light of globalization that happened in the early part of the 20th century, and just got more and more intense throughout the 20th century. So we're stronger than ever. We're better than ever. Our immune systems are more sophisticated than ever, and this accounts for why we live so much longer. So to my knowledge, I'm not aware of any economist who's ever observed this. And it's the first time she told that to me, it blew my mind, because I immediately really saw that there's some real power in that analysis. And I hope that at some point people follow up on this, particularly economists, which actually, and I know I'm talking a little bit much, let me just make one last point here along these lines. So we become so hyper specialized in our thinking that like, we study economics, and we think economics is what we specialize in. It's all we need to think about. Or, you develop a libertarian political outlook, and you think about rights and liberties, but you don't think about other things like cell biology or whatever. Like we become ignorant of these broader fields of study, and this has been very costly to us, because when something like this happens this year, I think for a lot of people, it's just it's taken people by surprise. And so they don't know what to say about it. So I hope that one of the things that's going to happen after all this is over is that people that are interested in the status of liberalism in the world start taking seriously subjects like epidemiology and immunology and public health. And this is a major thing we're going to have to fix, I think, in the coming year.
And we're talking about Dr. Gupta. She, just to add a little bit of color, she's not like just some, half-rate epidemiologist or like an associate professor or anything like that, right? Like she's very well respected. She's been called the premier epidemiologist in the world before.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not. This is not just some crackpot, from Podunk University.
Yeah, she's a real visionary, I can tell you, and also in addition to that, she's a novelist. So she's like this world genius. I reran an article she wrote 20 years ago on AIR. There was an attack on disease modeling. And she said, this is not the right way to think about diseases. You can't just put them in an agent-based computer model and expect them to follow a predictable route that computer programs demand that they do. And she says the more this modeling goes on, the more we began to oversimplify the world and create this illusion of control. Mm-hmm. So if this continues, it's going to lead to genuine disaster. So she wants to get back to a pure medically based way of understanding pathogens.
Why do you think people still put stock in models? I mean, climate models, I can kind of understand. They're predicting the future far, far in advance of when any of this stuff will come true. So everybody's going to forget about it anyway. But these disease models, I mean, they're predicting stuff in February that's supposed to happen in April. And every one of them is so far off base. But on the other hand, when I mention that to people, without citing anything, they say, no, these things have actually been pretty accurate if you look at it. And I don't see it, but I'm not a data scientist. I'm not a statistician. So maybe I'm just reading them wrong. Well, what do you think?
There's two big models. There's the IHME model and there's the Imperial College model. And both have proved catastrophically wrong. The IHME model keeps revising its predictions backwards, to make it look better than it actually is. But they've been off by 70, 80 factors of 90% more. It's like it's just utterly crazy. I mean, the New York Times, February 27th. And by the way, all these crazy predictions, not all of them are based on models. Many of them are, but sometimes they're just people making stuff up, like Donald McNeil of the New York Times, whose training is in rhetoric from Berkeley University, is the top infectious disease journalist at the New York Times. And he said on a podcast, February 27th, that 6.6 million Americans were going to die from COVID unless we lock down. Okay, that was a crazy, insane prediction, but it was made in nation's top newspaper and a podcast that was listened to at the time by 2 to 3 million people a day. So, the amount of irresponsibility here is just incredible. The other thing that's been discovered in the meantime is that the IHME model and the Imperial College model all assume homogeneity of risk to COVID. So they're not even adjusting for the population gradients of risk, for the fact that it's radically heterogeneous. For most of the population, this is hardly a disease at all, and so it's really focused on the unhealthy elderly. That's where the real risk is. But the models don't even build in those factors. They just assume equal risk from the part of everybody. And then they use these agent-based models to imagine that everybody stays separate, And there's this sort of intuitive plausibility to the idea of social distancing, I suppose. I asked a real specialist about this because, by the way, I've never seen any scientific evidence that the way we're talking about social distancing, which is really just forced human separation, is capable of mitigating a virus. I've just not seen any research that seems to back that. And I asked a top expert, and I said, what's your actual view about social distancing? He said, it's certainly right that if I'm in Washington, D.C., and somebody else lives in Paris, and we never come in contact with each other, it's very unlikely that he would be able to give me a disease. So, in that sense, that's the intuitive plausibility. But the stuff of 6 feet apart, and you can only have 3 people on an elevator, and 5 people at a table, and 10 people at a house gathering, it's all just completely improvised gibberish based on medieval style miasma theory, or just a mysticism. It's just a failure to understand. And as Gupta says, the illusion of control. We can't bear the idea that there's a pathogen present among us that we can't see and can't control. It's just something has gone wrong with our brains. We're unwilling to recognize that and admit that.
Yeah. And even now at this point, governors are starting to admit it. They're not, it's driving me crazy because, from the very beginning, Dr. Osterholm, who he's a professor here at the University of Minnesota, and he's one of Joe Biden's top advisors. Yeah. He got into some trouble because he said, look, you're not going to spread this virus through incidental contact at the grocery store. You probably don't even need to wear a mask. And that was months ago. He got into huge trouble for it. And so he walked back that, of course. And now, we've got governors enacting restrictions on Thanksgiving and Christmas gatherings and that sort of thing. But they're also coming around to that. Look, this thing isn't spreading at the grocery store. It's spreading at restaurants and bars after 10 o'clock because, the virus is a night owl. But they're not lifting the mandates. I'm walking in the grocery store and there's people like I wear the mask, but I'm kind of flippant about it. I mimic the manager and security guard at Target who wear it below their nose. But people freak out because, this 10 seconds of me reaching past them to grab a jar of peanut butter might just spark an infection. What do you think?
We've all gotten just wildly paranoid, and adopted this Nietzschean view of humanity. It's actually not even Nietzsche's view, but he talked about it. He said there's 2 ways you can look at people: as bundles of dangerous germs and pathogens, or as human beings with dignity and rights. Yeah. And so we rejected this liberal view, modern view towards human beings, and adopted a medieval and scary view. As for why the restrictions aren't being repealed, part of the problem is that partially because of media, but also I don't know, it's just the nature of politics right now. Governors don't want to be held responsible for any of the effects of liberalization. And this is a particular issue. Like, I'll just give you an example of this. Like, one of the things that the Trump administration could do right now, but has not done, is fix the travel restrictions, right? Like, just open up travel again so that Paris can come to you and you can go to Paris. And there's people being separated from loved ones all over the world. Even now, for 9 months, people have been isolated from friends and family because they happen to live in a different country. So there's talk within the White House about doing it, and they were considering it. And then the cases went up in Europe and said, like, oh, we can't do that because we're bringing them here. Okay, the pathogens are already here. There's no danger in having people bring it here. Again, this is not some nasty thing we can continue to keep out. These travel restrictions. And by the way, the World Health Organization and the CDC and every infectious disease expert ever has confirmed that the travel restrictions do not work and are more costly to society than any benefits that come from them in the presence of a new virus. So there's nobody who recommended these travel restrictions. The Trump administration did that on its own, but now they can't seem to get rid of them because there's no political gain to them. And if anything should go wrong, and it's especially because when you have the press, all over this, if Trump repealed restrictions on travel from Europe, you would have CNN going, oh my God, diseased Europeans are coming here and this is all Trump's fault. So they didn't want to deal with those kind of headlines. Right. And so then there was talk about, well, okay, now we can't open up with Europe. We can't open up with Australia. We can't open up with UK, but maybe we can open up with Brazil, where the virus seems to have, more or less under control, and Bolsonaro's a good guy, and we have good trading relationships with Brazil. So there's one person on the task force who's arguing for this, and 5 other people who are like, yeah, let's not do that, and that was the end of it. So this is the problem, right? I mean, these restrictions are in place, and there are very few people with the guts to repeal them. I live in Massachusetts, right? We are as stringent now as we've been since April. It's unbelievable. But you look at a very interesting question is like, what's wrong with the American government and with our state governments around this country? Most countries in the world, when you look at the stringency indexes, you see that they got really stringent in the early days and then got rid of all the stringencies. Even a place like New Zealand, which locked down, then opened up, not to trade and travel and that sort of thing, but just internally. Or you think of other places like Denmark and Norway, many places around the world, most countries around the world, got really stringent initially, like 60, 70, 80%. So it was very costly for people, and the stringencies are down now to 20, 30%, In the US, it's unbelievable. It was like we went up to like 70% and basically have stayed there, all year. And I don't know why U.S. government is so completely, our governments in the United States are so completely unable to adapt to the realities. It's like you'd think that a country with a Bill of Rights and a history of freedom, that sort of thing, would be anxious to get back to freedom. But instead, we're destroying the arts. I'd be like, Broadway is still closed. I mean, the live performances, music, we've got musicians all over the country just sitting on their hands. They have no idea what to do. We're bankrupting our hotels and hospitality industry and small restaurants. Restaurants are one of the few industries in this country that aren't controlled by some one major, two or three major dominant corporations. We still have lots of local restaurants, all over the country. They're all being bankrupted. Like, why? What are we doing this for? And it just keeps going on and on and on. And in New York alone, I mean, like half the businesses have shut down. I don't know if you've been there, but it's a shocking thing to go to the world's greatest city and see the place just completely windswept. Or just traveling through it in New England, like I've done variously, and just driving into these small towns, go to the downtown districts, half the stores are bankrupt. I mean, I'm sorry, the whole thing is so unbelievably depressing, and yet even in the presence of all these high costs, all this stuff, we're still not opening up. I mean, it's just something unbelievable. I don't know what it's going to take for these governors to shift. And whether it's on the state level or the federal level, I don't know what's gone wrong in this country where we have preferred these. You know that in the stringency indexes that Russia is much lower than the U.S. today? It's just unbelievable.
Well, of course, they're maniacs in Russia. I think, that might be part of it too, is that America has just become very sanitized. We're a descending empire, and it's just we're grasping and hoping that there's some sort of savior to come, and of course Donald Trump is not that savior, and I think that's a huge part of it. I mean, he's sort of the face of the degeneracy, and to bring it back sort of to the mysticism and the religious view of this thing. It's what it, I mean, that's what it is. It's a moral issue. It's not even about spreading a virus, really. Vin Armani, from the very beginning, he said, this isn't a genetic virus. This is a memetic virus. The real infection is what this is doing to our psychology. And I think America, more than anybody else, given our sort of Puritan founding, I mean, America is a religious, what Chesterton, I think, called America the country with the soul of a church. And I think that, as secular as we become, we don't really shake that.
I think you make a really interesting point. In the Middle Ages, there was the belief, especially during the plagues, that the reason the plagues visit us is because we're sinful. And so there were these groups. They traveled all over Europe and even in the UK, called the flagellants, and they would dress up in these dark clothes, penitent outfits, and whip themselves. And they just go from city to city doing this. Now, why were they doing this? Well, because there's two things. One is that they believed that it was the presence of sin in the world and the lack of holiness in the world that was causing God to punish us with disease. But the reason they're so public about it is that they wanted to make everybody else feel a sense of guilt. So, like, they would go to a town where people would be behaving normally. They'd be, look, you're out shopping, you're having fun, you're singing and dancing, and so therefore you're causing the disease to come, and we're whipping ourselves and miserable, and the more fun you have, the more we have to whip ourselves because we have to reduce the amount of sin there is in the world. And so they're extremely judgy, towards everybody, and trying to spread guilt and sadness all around. So if you want to port that into the 21st century, it's something like this. Like, something happened 4 years ago when Trump was elected president, that there was a class of people in this country that said that this was an intolerable, insufferable, wrong thing to have happened, never should have happened. It happened because of Russia, and then it happened because of somebody else and somebody else. And finally, it's like this year that it said, but look, this country is so sinful. We're going to have to punish everybody for allowing Donald Trump to stay as president. And so they became the new flagellants, no more bowling, no more surfing, no more fishing, no more movies, no more Broadway, no more parties, no more fun until Donald Trump is gone. And that is the moral element here. It's absolutely pathological, but I agree with you that there's some strange poetry in that repeats, this Middle Ages experience. One of the funny headlines that came out in early March in the New York Times was an article by Donald McNeil, our friend, said, to control this virus, we need to go full medieval. I looked at it, I thought, that is insane.
I remember that.
So much for liberalism, right? Well, it turns out we did. So now we got rid of dentistry. We have the new flagellants. We've recreated the caste system. We've got a new feudalism of people with blue check marks who can live on Zoom, while the working classes and the unclean drop off meals at their door.
Right.
So we have gone full medieval and rejected every important tenet that we previously believed about modernity, and we did that this year.
I think one thing that will kind of, I don't think there's a cure for this memetic virus. I think we're going to have mask season the same way we have flu season every year forever. That's sort of my my pessimistic take on it. But I think my optimistic take, right now, if you go hang out with a group of 20-something restaurant and retail workers, not a single one of them is going. They're going to tell you that they wear their masks, and they're going to tell you that they're good and moral and upstanding. But if you actually go to a party at one of their houses, they're going to be drinking. They're going to be out past 10. They're going to be hugging. I got a big hug from a 22-year-old friend a couple weeks ago, and it was fantastic. It was the first time I'd hugged somebody that wasn't a family member or my partner in months, and like I teared up when it happened. It was like an experience. Oh, and I think that as these people who are living via Zoom and delivered meals start to get infected by the virus, realize, hey, maybe this wasn't so bad. Because they're locked in their houses. Of course they're not getting it. Like you said, it's being the burden of the infection is being shifted onto the retail workers and the restaurant workers. And of course the licensed practical nurses who staff these nursing homes, the wage workers, and they're the ones who are realizing, hey, yeah, it sucks. I got sick for a few days and here I am back at work. That hasn't happened to the cubicle workers or the vice presidents or the consultants and all that. They're all able to do their jobs via Zoom. They're able to live without leaving the house. It almost makes me wish that it was more spreadable by kids, just so that kids could bring it home, from the limited access they get to their on-campus schooling.
Yeah, I wonder how successful we are at segregating society into the disease and not disease. I mean, but probably to some extent. But I just don't know. I try to follow all the science. By the way, there's 50,000 studies out now on coronavirus. There's no way anybody who claims to have followed all the studies, it's not possible. It's not possible for anybody to have followed all these studies, much less repeating them. They're cranking out these studies, just so quickly. They don't even have time to test them. There was an article that appeared in Nature a few weeks back that seemed to endorse mask mandates. That without between the submission and the publication was 7 days. Well, my colleague here, Phil Magnus, got into the article, started digging through the data, and realized it was all completely wrong. They had the wrong survey information placed in the wrong dates, and they gamed everything up to come up with their fake correlation and invented causation. The whole study was bogus. So he wrote Nature and proved that it was completely wrong. 2 weeks later, they came back with a note saying, well, you're right, there's some errors here, but it doesn't affect that conclusion, which is incorrect. So they took 2 weeks to even respond to his letter back, but 1 week to publish it between submission and publication. So, and the amount of phony science out there, I mean, the CDC, it's just a scandal what's going on. CDC doesn't even go into the office. So you've got all these people who are working there, and there's 2 or 3 guys who are in charge of posting things on their website, studies and things. And so they just grab things that they like and stick them up there without any scientific review process whatsoever. And so there was this perfectly silly article that appeared a few months ago where they found 300 people who tested negative and 300 people who tested positive. And they asked them what they had done the previous 2 weeks. Did you go to church? Did you stay indoors a large number of people? Did you wear your mask? Did you travel anywhere? Did you go to movies? Did you go to restaurants? Did you do all these various questions, like 12 possible activities? And they tried to find so already this is already sort of sketchy, right? Like, just people really remember exactly what they did 2 weeks ago. It's not clear. But what they found was between the 2 groups that there's no correlation at all between the sick and the not sick on anything that they asked. Not mask wearing, not church going, not gatherings, not protests, nothing. The one exception was restaurants. So they discovered that there's a slightly higher incidence of positive PCR tests with people who went to restaurants than not. And so I'm thinking, well, that's a funny conclusion. If you didn't show any correlation with mask wearing or gatherings or church going or traveling, anything else, why wouldn't that be the headline? No relationship whatsoever between wearing a mask and avoiding the disease. No, the headline was, restaurants are spreading COVID. Okay. So the conclusion was, if you're going to have a restaurant, it needs to be extremely well ventilated. Well, I looked through the study, and deep within it, it turns out when they asked if you'd been to a restaurant, they didn't ask more. This was taken in like July, right? They didn't ask a more fundamental question: were you indoors or not? They never asked that question.
Right.
So the people who went to restaurants, they might have been eating outdoors. We still don't know because that wasn't part of the survey. So in other words, the conclusion of the article that you need to have a high degree of ventilation in your restaurants if you're going to open them can't even be correct because they had no idea if people – in those days, most people were dining outdoors anyway. So it might not have anything to do with being inside. And yet the CDC is pushing out this fake science on their own website and giving it the imprimatur of the Center for Disease Control. If anybody believes that garbage anymore, I don't know if anybody trusts anything the CDC says, but if you do, you're going to be massively misled by this ridiculous study. And that's just one example among thousands.
Yeah. Well, that's a terrible place to end. So I do want to. I want to ask you. I want to ask you about some of your previous work. You wrote this article a long time ago that I go back and reread every year about libertarian brutalism, and I think a lot of people took that personally. I think it's a lot more abstract than that.
Yeah. I was thinking about that. That article was widely misunderstood, I think. But anyway. Yeah.
And, basically what it boils down to is libertarians can be perceived as assholes, or we can be perceived as people who are interested in making the world a better place. And you've got all these books. It's the Bourbon for Breakfast was absolutely awesome to read while sitting on the patio at a restaurant drinking bourbon. Jetson's World, talking about how we live in the future. The Market Loves You, which is your most recent, prior to pre-COVID book. Can you just kind of talk a little bit about your sort of the thesis of your life's work, I guess?
Yeah. Well, I guess the thesis of my life was that there's no inconsistency between living a good life and living in a good society. Yeah. And I think maybe libertarianism tended to neglect that broader perspective for a long time. Like we should aspire to live in a good society in which everyone has a chance to thrive and cooperate with other people, where there's not exclusions and coerced inequalities and things like that. Like, I think liberalism or libertarianism can coexist, in fact, as really an essential element of living a good world. Where people are not hungry, where people are not suffering, where people are not discriminated against systematically. So these are not inconsistent. Like that's why my brutalism article, contrasted brutalism with humanitarianism. Like I was reading back on some of the early works of Murray Rothbard and Mises and Hayek. And the liberal tradition has always been about the common good, and I don't think that's something we should forget about, just in the name of promoting, our individual interests. There's not an inconsistency between our individual interests and the social interests, more broadly speaking. And that's always been a theme of liberalism. And I think I've tried to revive that, not by preaching so much, but by illustrating, celebrating, and giving examples of the consistency between a radical view towards liberty and living in the best possible world. and that we don't really face a choice between making the world a better place and living a good life. Those are all the same thing, and that's, I would say, a really important message that I've always had in my head, not in a preachy way, but in a way that inspires me to reveal as much as I can all the ways in which liberty helps achieve more human cooperation and better lives for all people. And I hope that that's been part of my influence, is to drive the ethos of libertarianism in that direction a little bit more. And I hope that that I can get back to that after this year is over.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate it, and I know a lot of other people do. We've been truly, truly blessed to have you as part of this movement, and as influential as you've been for actually, most of my life, and for the entirety of my libertarianism, I guess. So, thank you so much for joining me today, Jeffrey. Where can people find you?
I'm on Twitter all the time, Jeffrey A. Tucker. Make sure you get the right account, because there's a couple of fraud accounts out there that keep and then I write every day or two at the American Institute for Economic Research. So, and let me just end with one last thing here. These are difficult times. To keep your hopes up, and despair is just closer than it ever has been in most of our lives. Stay hopeful. Don't despair. Think about the light. Think about the truth. Think about the possibility we can get through this and start building our lives again. But we need you. We all need each other. And we're in the struggle together. And people who love liberty are more important than they've ever been now. So now's the time to speak out. Now's the time to help others. When others around you start to despair, and be there for them, love them, care for them, and we'll get through this, I think.
All right. Great. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thanks again to Jeffrey Tucker for joining me today. Head over to urbanagorist.com/10 for today's show notes, including a link to Jeff's Twitter, which is not to be missed. Thursday this week, I'll be posting an interview with the great Sal Mayweather, otherwise known as Sal the Agorist. You won't want to miss that, so please be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts and share it with your friends. And if you have a free minute, please leave a review on iTunes for me, even if you're listening on a different app. iTunes reviews really help get the word out there. I really appreciate it, and until next time, live free.
This is the way